Good evening. My name is Hugh Challens-Lipton. I'm Executive Director of the Art, Design and Music Department here at Queen's University of Charlotte, as well as McMahon Professor of Art History and a Nobel Faculty Fellow. It's my honor to virtually welcome you this evening to our salon on Reshaping Charlotte's Art. We have an illustrious panel joining us tonight to discuss how the cultural scene in our city is evolving and being reshaped for the next decade and beyond. Before I turn over the conversation to our panel moderator, Matt Olin, I'd like to thank the members of the Learning Society and the Arts at Queen's, whose contributions make this conversation possible. We deeply appreciate your support throughout this unfamiliar year. We have produced student engagement opportunities, including a conversation with presidential historian Doris Kearns-Goodwin and an art exhibition with Queen's faculty and artists from Penland School of Craft. Students have adjusted and even thrived despite the circumstances, and we can't wait to welcome you back to our campus when it's safe to do so. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to Matt Olin, who you may know as co-host of Charlotte Morning's Creative. Matt is a Queens City native and a co-founder of Charlotte is Creative, which develops programs and initiatives designed to break the Charlotte mold and remake it with creativity into a city that draws people in, excites them, and inspires them to invest their financial, social, and creative capital in our community. For a further introduction of the wonderful work Charlotte is Creative does in our city, please join me now with this brief video, and welcome, Matt.
This is a statement.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Hit the dope. When you at the top, they'll hit the flow. But you're not done, then you want some more. You self-esteem cause it's getting low. It's getting low. When it all pays off, can't let it stop now. If you let it get to you, that's when it all falls down. I care for you, care for you. Nothing else even matters but you. At the end of the day, it's just you. People tell you lies, can't tell the whole truth. People taking one step forward, 2 steps back. It's part of life. There's nothing that's wrong with that. Have faith, have faith. Remember one thing, it's never too late. Be patient, it's coming one day. Always have your back, everything is okay.
I mean, how can you not be psyched about Charlotte's creativity after watching a hype video like that? Woo! Well, first of all, thank you so much, CU, and good evening, everyone. I'm Matt Olin. I'm the co-founder of Charlotte is Creative, as CU said. And since 2015, our nonprofit has worked to fund and promote and connect and advocate for our city's creative individuals and organizations, and a champion collaboration between them and the larger business community here. And so it's a pleasure to have been asked to facilitate this conversation tonight with these visionary creative leaders who you'll meet very shortly. First, though, I want to take a moment to offer some context on tonight's topic, Reshaping Charlotte's Arts, our evolving cultural sector in 2021 and beyond. Artists and other creatives are by their very nature innovators. Every single creative who appeared in that video that you just saw is an innovator. And Charlotte is a city that champions business and innovation, always has and hopefully always will. Innovation is fueled by arts and creativity, and it's abundant in the Queen City. Our creatives are innovating every day here, from forward-thinking visual artists and muralists to scrappy tech creatives that are, creating the next billion-dollar company, or Charlotte musicians like Anthony Hamilton or DaBaby, who expand our fame along with their own. Now, when outside companies consider relocating to Charlotte, which is happening more and more and will likely increase in the post-pandemic world, yes, they are attracted to our city's resources and infrastructure, but it's the vibrant creative life at work in every corner of our city that draws them in and makes them feel like they've found home. In fact, I would assert that Charlotte's reputation is built in large part on the work of creatives here and on the vision that they create. Think about how the 17 artists that painted the Black Lives Matter mural uptown last June made Charlotte part of an international discussion. So as we begin to slowly emerge from a traumatic pandemic, and we recognize that many artists and creatives and arts organizations have been exponentially affected by it. Many were the first to close down or lose work. Many will be the last to return. It's critical that we approach the recovery and the inevitable sort of reshaping of Charlotte's arts in a thoughtful and intentional way. How do we use this moment and the innovative nature of our creatives to evolve our cultural sector into something that perhaps maybe it should have been long ago? But now this moment has opened up an opportunity to get some more things right in terms of equity and arts funding, which is a very hot topic in Charlotte's creative community right now, and capacity building and more. I think part of the evolution must entail a shift in how we see creatives and how they see themselves. They are small businesses. Each creative in Charlotte's gig economy is a small business. Each is an entrepreneur working hard in their craft or their discipline to find success that sustains them and their families, and if all goes well, employs others. And we must also commit to creating conditions in Charlotte whereby sustainable creative careers and businesses can launch and flourish. It's a whole new way of seeing and valuing and championing Charlotte's creativity, and I'm willing to bet that we're going to touch on this and many other points as we dive into our panel conversation. Now, as we do, please note that we have an audience Q&A scheduled near the end. And so we encourage you to submit any questions you have in real time this evening by emailing them to learningsociety@queens.edu, learningsociety@queens.edu. And so without further ado, it is my honor to present you this panel of remarkable Charlotte creatives, each an innovator in their own right. You can read their full bios in your digital program. So first up is Dr. Keith Cradle. Dr. Keith Cradle is the Director of Youth and Juvenile Services for the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. He is also currently on the board of directors for the Beckler Museum, the Mint Museum Contemporary Art Board, Charlotte Trail of History, and Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. And he's served on many, many other boards of creative organizations. His involvement and commitment to the development of the arts and cultural sectors of Charlotte have led him to create an art-focused podcast called Crafted with Cradle, and to help start the jail arts program at the Beckler Museum that works with youth in detention and helps them discover, develop, and harness their appreciation for art. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Cradle?
Good evening, Matt. Thank you. I'm doing good, man. Always good to see you, sir.
You too, my friend. Next up is Tom Gabbard, who has been the CEO of Blumenthal Performing Arts since 2003, managing 6 theaters in Charlotte, hosting over 1,000 performances annually, as well as their extensive education programs. Now, during his tenure, the Blumenthal has become a top 10 market for touring Broadway shows in North America. He's a member of the Board of Governors of the Broadway League. He's been a voter for Broadway's Tony Awards for many, many years. He received the League's Award for Outstanding Achievement in Presenter Management, and he serves as the co-chair of the Jimmy Awards, the National High School Musical Theater Awards held annually on Broadway. Tom Gabbard, how you doing this evening?
Fantastic. It's great to be with you, Matt.
The pleasure is all mine. Next up is Irisol Gonzalez, who is a fine artist and muralist living and working here in Charlotte. She immigrated to the U.S. with her Costa Rican immediate family at age 10, and today she's a League of Creative Interventionalists Fellow and a recipient of an Arts and Science Council Emerging Creator Fellowship. She has exhibited in solo exhibitions in Spain. She's participated in many group exhibitions, including at the Contemporary Museum of Art in Raleigh, right here at Queen's University as well. Her public work often reflects her interpretation of what it means to be a Latin American immigrant, a brown woman, and a person who has 2 cultures working simultaneously in every endeavor and experience. Irisol, it is wonderful to see you again this evening.
It's so good to see you. Thank you for having me tonight.
And finally, multimedia artist, illustrator, writer, activist, and North Carolina native Bree Stallings graduated from Queen's University in 2013 with a bachelor degree in studio art and creative writing. She uses her art as a vehicle to raise awareness for many causes that affect her life and those closest to her, such as economic mobility, sexual health advocacy, displacement and homelessness, and environmental consciousness. She teaches adults and children drawing and painting techniques at her studio called the Learning Lab. And later this month, she'll be joining Tom's team at the Blumenthal in the newly created position of Director of Artistic Experiences, focusing on special projects, art direction, and artist development, where she can be a mentor, educator, and connector for local artists, helping them succeed. Bree, welcome to the panel.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Now, folks, as you listen to this conversation, you come up with any questions that you would like to ask the panel, again, just send them to learningsociety@queens.edu. And we'll get to most of those hopefully near the end of the program. Now, for starters, I have a handful of questions to get us started. And we're going to start with this question. An August 2020 Brookings Institute report about the devastating impacts of COVID-19 on the creative sector very astutely pointed out the following point. With reduced demand for large cultural events as a result of social distancing, there's an opportunity for communities to shift to locally sourced culture. Communities can develop strategies to hire local creative and create online portals and platforms to allow residents and businesses to hire local artists. So one way of looking at our current reality is that it's forcing us to give local artists the platform and the opportunities that they've so desperately needed and long deserved. That these shifts instigated by the pandemic are perhaps helping to set the stage for artists to have sustainable careers locally. So panel, what is your perspective on this? And I'd love to start with Tom Gabbard, as many of these shifts that we're talking about are sort of catching up in a way to some of the work that you've been doing at the Blumenthal, lifting up and empowering local artists for years. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think you're right to describe it as just, providing some jet fuel perhaps to some things that were underway. And since a lot of people know Blumenthal, I think, especially if you've been here a long time, you know that it was founded by people like Hugh McCall and Deborah Harris, who wanted a place that celebrated local artists and enabled them. But I think we became, very aware maybe 7-8 years ago of the necessity to really broaden the community of artists that we serve and the audiences that we serve. And as good as things had been, that we needed to really broaden that reach. And so one of the things we began with was an international hip hop festival that we brought here from London called Breaking Convention. And that was transformative in many respects because it became the catalyst for us to connect with this community of hip hop artists in Charlotte that is really quite remarkable. And for many of us was unseen until we connected there and created a platform to acknowledge and respect and nurture their work. So I think what's happening now is encouraging us to do more of that. After Breaking Convention, we decided to create our own version of that, which we call We Are Hip Hop. Bree is a part of that artistic team, and we even in the midst of the pandemic, we did a reveal weekend out at Camp North End, and so that's the next step in that whole process. But we know that artists were a lot of incomes were taken away because of COVID, and so some of you may have seen that we worked with Center City Partners to create an artist gig fund to raise money to employ artists and to put artists back to work. And so in the fall, we had a whole series of concerts throughout the city to get artists back to work. And I think we'll be seeing more of that. So I want you to know how energized I am, and I hope everyone in the community is, that we are redefining the arts here in Charlotte and redefining it in a way that creates more opportunity, more art, more creativity, more love, more good things.
I couldn't agree more. Does any other member of the panel want to weigh in on this idea of the pandemic sort of propelling us into this new sort of reshaping of arts in Charlotte? It certainly seems like part of the sector's evolution involves the sort of traditional ways of doing things being flipped on its head. I mean, from an audience perspective, a shift from a sort of a top-down approach where folks at the top have been sort of telling audiences what they should like and what's important, to now being more responsive to communities' wants and needs. So from an artist perspective, and I'd like to pose this next question to Bree, from an artist perspective, a shift from artists seeking access from gatekeepers to artists actually becoming the gatekeepers. Bree, as an artist yourself, is this what you're starting to see in your work, working out in the community?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for asking that kind of as a trailer to the last question, because I think they kind of go in tandem. And I'm seeking in my mind a different word other than gatekeeper, because I think that's what exists now. And as artists, we naturally kind of look between systems to see where things could be changed. So there are those that are kind of navigating the systems to help manipulate them to produce like better results for the community, and there are those that like repel against systems, and both of those are really important. So what role does a gatekeeper play in that? I'm not sure, but as artists gain more access, more resources, I like to think of us as bridge builders. And so it's having a direct connection, a direct pulse into what the communities want, what's interesting, what's new, what's exciting. And naturally, it's something that we do all the time because it's part of the artistic process, right? Artists, we naturally have this skill that's built into what we do. And this is something that maybe I used to think was a flaw, but I really embrace it as a strength now, because we cycle through ideas. We know when something's bad and when to throw it away. We know when to like rush to the trash and pull it back out and dust it off. And that's part of it. We cycle through that maybe a lot faster than people in other careers would. And that's a good, fresh way of doing it. And so acting as bridge builders and gatekeepers, thinking about also the role that we have to play in that cyclical cycle to just not always be centered, because that's not the point. The point is not to replace some of the larger arts entities with people that then get to choose who's in or who's out, who's part of the cool kids clique. That's not helpful. It's just a new face on an old cycle. And so something that I'm really starting to see is a lot of these kind of open conversations and shifting of power and a turn into the community voices. And the artists are just used to amplify those rather than define without asking. And that's something that we're naturally good at. And the more that Charlotte embraces it, the better off we all will be.
Well, to that point, and I think a lot of it has to be about being intentional about inviting artists into the sector, into the opportunities. And so this next question I'd like to pose to Irisol. As a Latin American immigrant and an artist, what are your thoughts about the importance of inviting certain communities into the arts world here, so that diverse artists are actually learning about opportunities to get involved, to get discovered, to get paid to work, and to advance their careers here?
Absolutely. I think that inviting community not only helps us bring art to these communities, but it also opens up a space for the people in these communities to have a voice, because I think that what we have seen in the art world, especially being in the Hispanic.
We may have lost Irisol. I'm so sorry to see that happen. I know she was having a little bit of connection issues. So hopefully she can get back connected with us and we can hear the rest of her perspective on that. In the meantime, though, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Keith Cradle. You and I spoke a little bit in preparation for this panel conversation. And one of the points that I walked away with was that on some level, we're all craving this return to normal. And so, Keith, if we can agree that these evolutions to the creative sector that we're talking about are good things, how do we keep from slipping back to where we were before the pandemic? In other words, if the old normal was sort of a top-down overemphasis on the institutional arts, how do we ensure that our new normal reflects the lessons that we've learned along the way and that we stay forward-thinking despite this human desire for normalcy?
So, I think that's kind of it's a two-part answer to that question. One, I always approach things from the lens of a patron. That's what I am. I'm a patron. I'm a donor. I'm a board member. So I look at all those things from that lens. And first and foremost, when we talked about local at the beginning of this conversation, most of our entry, our gateway, our portal to art is pretty much local. And we think about economic divides. We think about all the things that we've all gone and seen, throughout the year. For many folk in our community, that entry probably starts off at a very low price point, maybe a high school play, maybe a free festival, something in the park. And so as we gradually increase, I think, our engagement, institutions have to be wary of that. They have to be understanding, again, of how people can do what they can based on their finances, based on the economics, based on their social levels, all the things that are happening in our community. And so what happened last year for a lot of folk was they found entry because our art and culture community basically said, they stepped up and said, we'll do a lot of this stuff for free. We're going to go virtual. We'll be online, and we'll have these offerings really for free at or a very low price point. And so that allowed for a lot of folk who primarily wouldn't have done it, maybe going to the symphony, maybe going to a Broadway show, going to Blumenthal, whatever it was, they now found a way in. And so as we talk about this return to normal, people are kind of fearful of the fact that as buildings open back up, as Tom get ready to open back up, Blumenthal, are those price points now going to go back to, $100, $200, and putting people in a position to start choosing again, is it groceries or is it a show? Because a lot of folk really haven't returned back to whatever economic level they may have been, in 2019 to 2020, here in 2021. And we know that a $1,400 stimulus check is not going to cover all of those expenses. So I believe that what people are really thinking about is, one, they thoroughly enjoyed not so much the pandemic, but I think they enjoyed locally what our art community did for them, which was step into that gap, create, I think, platforms in which people were very happy to see shows. I mean, it gave people an outlet. I remember setting up in my garage, watching, the ballet, it was things that we were able to do. Now folk are kind of looking, is that stuff going to go away? And as that normal comes back, are we just going right back to the brick and mortar, the large institutions, the art exhibition openings where I may not feel welcome? And so I think that's where institutional leaders have to be cognizant and kind of looking and making sure that we kind of firm out some of those things that happened and understand that those are some great things and we should keep some of that stuff for the long haul.
Tom, and Bree, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Keith's thoughts there. I mean, Tom, you've been the leader at Blumenthal for so long and a stalwart leader of arts here in Charlotte for many years. Bree, you're about to join the Blumenthal team there. Talk a little bit about your plans for the future, your thoughts for the future in terms of ensuring that access for audiences remains intact while more and more local artists are starting to share the spotlight. Tom, I think you may be muted there.
I really feel like this is a shift forever for all of us and for the good. So, among the things, you mentioned Breeze joining our team, Blues Rogers joined our team back in September. And, and what I've asked with both of them is to really help lead the way. That our job as Blumenthal is to support, provide resources, provide a little bit of guidance, but to the point that we need to get away from a top-down approach, and that we need artists to help lead the way with some of this. The reality is it's a messier process, and so those of us who are arts leaders have to become comfortable with a process that is perhaps a little less controlling and more of an enabler and maybe a little bit messier and more organic. I think, especially the institutions, we can be a little buttoned down sometimes, and we have to accept the processes of how we create new programs needs to be a little more organic. But to Keith's point as well, that a lot of this change also needs to be driven by the fact that that's what the public wants from us. And if we're really focused on serving the public and serving the broadest public possible, then a lot of these are a natural outcome. Because if we ignore that, we're actually just disconnecting ourselves from people who could be ticket buyers, who could be donors, who can be attendees. And so I appreciate that they brought that up, that we're really just being responsive to the public.
That's absolutely. And, Tom, I love the fact that Charlotte, which is such a clean, neat, as you said, button-up city, this idea that we can all start embracing the messiness that is creativity. There's such beauty in that messiness, but also that messiness is what's going to lead to opening up access and pathways to creative careers for diverse creatives of all kinds. Man, I hope Ira the Soul can reconnect, because I'm just dying to get back to her question, to her answer on this. There you are, Ira the Soul. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes, in part. Let's try it out. Let's do it.
So I'd like to circle back to your.
I'm so sorry about the connection issue.
It's okay. We'll give it another shot. We were just talking about the beauty of how messy creativity is, but how it's going to open up so many channels and doors for people. No doubt your path to becoming a working artist with a sustainable career has been a messy one. It has to be. So talk to us a little bit more about the importance of certain communities being invited into these opportunities in the arts world.
So the reason why it's important to have these communities come in, it's not only to bring them in to create a bridge, but also to give voice to these communities, because what's happening in these communities we're missing out on. And I speak about the Latinx community specifically because, for example, we have been cornered into our artistic culture being that of our native countries, and we don't take into consideration.
It's like a little, I die a little bit every time it happens. My heart just breaks every time it happens. Okay, we're going to keep on trucking along, and I can't wait to get her back here. Panel, what I'd like to ask a little bit now is about younger artists here in Charlotte. What do we need to do as a creative sector and as a city to help younger artists succeed and really find that pathway to making a living, a sustainable living here as a creative? Anyone can jump in.
I think, a lot of the answers are kind of running parallel on these questions, right? It's about this, the word that y'all used earlier, messy process, but similar to the way that it is in the artistic process, it can be kind of painful or uncomfortable. And it's good to realize, that like maybe our first idea is not our best idea, or that we can, slow things down a little bit to make sure that we're getting all the good feedback that we want. And that's every time I talk to the people from the younger generation, that's what they're wanting. They're just wanting like a seat at the table. They want to contribute their answers. They want their ideas to be taken seriously. And I can relate to that in a lot of ways too, because I remember like kind of jump-starting my art career from Queens and having some really bomb, awesome teachers who believed in me and didn't treat me like a student. They treated me like my ideas were good. I could have a solo show. I could do this stuff. I could present things in this really professional way. And I always believe, people say that they're products of their environment, but I also believe that people are products of their expectations. So if we give people resources and access and room to talk, then we'll see the dividends on that in 5 and 10 years and immediately. And that's what we're craving, because people just often exclude young people, but they are a marginalized group that have very limited resources and capital, including social capital. So just even taking the time to create a relationship with a mentor or with an arts organization, and then giving a little bit of space and a little bit of hand-holding, that's okay. It might take a little bit more time, or to explain part of a process that you might think is just obvious. But yeah, like I said, the dividends will be there and they'll benefit everybody.
I think Bree's mention of the word mentors is really crucial, and I think our finding a more expansive network of mentors to help artists is really important. We had a situation a few years ago where we worked with an artist to do a pop-up art show one weekend, and the artist didn't know how to price the work. She needed somebody with a little bit of savvy and experience like Bree to help her conceive how she would price that. The institutions have a network and connections to help with. When we're working on Breaking Convention, we used to take 3 or 4 hip hop artists with us to London every year for Breaking Convention in London, where it originated. And having them on that tour allowed them to connect with other people all around the world. And the networking opportunity that they had was fantastic. But it took us, paying for the travel and saying, that's part of what we want you to do, is we want to open some doors for you. So I think the mentorship and the networking is really, really crucial.
And I'll add to that, Matt. I think, what the city has been talking about, and I'm quite sure the county will get around to it as well, is that building that economic framework around the actual process of making jobs, that folk can have a viable living creating art. And I think that's what scares a lot of young folk. They don't want to come out of college. They don't want to come out of their parents' home thinking that I'm not going to make any money. And we kind of scare people into that, by calling them the starving artist, we label it, and I think we have to create a community culture in which folk understand and recognize that there is a lifestyle and a livelihood to be made through art, through culture, and we have to nurture that on both sides, whether that's on the side of patrons, but also on the sides of institutions. And I think our city's having that conversation, and that we've all, kind of been witness to it right now. And I think the county as well will start having that. So I think part of that is that undergirding and recognizing where those economics will come from.
Boy, I mean, I could not agree more. We all want homegrown talent to stay here, and we want more talent, of course, to relocate here. Hopefully inspired by a reputation as a city, as a pro-creativity city where there are tons of opportunities here. Part of me feels like that needs to start even earlier, right? Do we need to start inspiring young budding creatives in middle school and high school to show them that not only is the city committed to creating the conditions here under which you can have a sustainable career, but here's what a sustainable career looks like. And we may have to widen our scope so that young creatives are seeing creative career opportunities in a variety of fields. It's not just painter, let's say, or actor. It's in tons and tons of different sectors and industries. And so I think part of it might be starting to reverse engineer how we're inspiring middle schoolers and high schools and showing them that pathway to a sustainable career, what that could be. At this point in the program, I would love to have Tom introduce a video. So we're gonna shift now to part 2 of the panel discussion, and it's gonna feature submitted video questions from Queen's University students and some others, which I think only makes sense because they are they represent the future generation of Charlotte's arts leaders and creative community. So as a transition to this, Tom, would you please say a few words about the Invest in Charlotte arts video that we're about to show?
This is a short video we put together in September. Some of you may be familiar with the publication that launched this year called Invest Charlotte. And we were slated to host their meeting live, and then COVID shut that down. And so we put together a video that was a part of a Zoom meeting for them. And the publication is, focused on all the great assets that Charlotte has that we can be proud of, and encouraging people to relocate their business here. So we put it together for that. Now, tonight, when I look at this, I will tell you, it brings out a certain wistfulness because it reminds us of what we've lost. It reminds us of what we can be proud of that Charlotte has. Here at Blumenthal, and I'm talking to you from my office here, it was a year ago tonight that we had our last concert. It was Kristen Chenoweth. And we're at a time, when a lot of us that love the arts are thinking about that last event that we went to before COVID shut it down. And so please enjoy this, enjoy all that Charlotte has, and also most of all, see in this what we can look forward to returning.
Ask us about the art in our town. Ask us how do we value creative expression and perspectives of this southern metropolis we call Charlotte. Ask us how our view of every hue of human goes beyond the bounds of Mecklenburg County and surrounding. And we will say that our heroes don't always wear capes. They save the day in creatively different ways. They sing, turning voices into beacons of hope and inspiration, creating sound, lullabying the sun until it goes down, rising up a night sky and filling it with stars and good vibes. They move, push their bodies until a breakdancing point toes and plie, ballet themselves into the hearts of the next generation of dancers, movers, shakers. This city is human, symphonic progression, voices of varied backgrounds and demographics, creating a sound of social change and challenging art and economics to be breathtaking and balanced. It is a canvas for muralists and graffiti artists showing the world that we invest in the idea of beautification and business, that buildings can be more than brick and mortar, they can hold color and tell a story, spark joy and innovation, can look like an invitation to the world's nations to come and share in our creations, that our creatives are no stranger to greatness. We shout it out in the streets and from rooftops, place it on big stages or small intimate engages. Either way, we invest in our creatives. We invest in their imagination, dedication, and motivation. We pour into their passions, their paint palettes, their instruments, their edible creations, sculpting tools, and dance shoes. We invest into our very best. To those taking their final bow, to those just taking their first steps. Even in a pandemic, we find ways to be resilient. We look at the analytics, see that our biggest capital will always be investing in our people and their spirit, their ability to pivot and turn uncertainty into a masterpiece, create a way out of no way. When you ask us about how do we value our town, we will show you the faces of those who create with color, words, sound, and movement. We will show you those who work hard for their community, their city, the faces of those who don't know the meaning of quit. We will show you that this is how we invest in Charlotte.
Well, that video really does capture the abundance of creativity in Charlotte. And to your point, Tom, everything we have to look forward to as well. And that we have creatives of all backgrounds and perspectives and crafts and disciplines at work here. So it's really, it captures that spirit, and I just love it. So Evan, let's run the first submitted video question. And once each question plays, folks, panel, I invite anyone to dive in and answer it if you feel so moved. So let's see the first submitted question.
Hey, my name is Ida Osterman, and I'm an international student from Sweden. And I'm in the new media design program with 2 minors in philosophy and studio art. And I'm a junior, so I'm graduating in May 2022. Last year, when COVID hit, I was enrolled in a ceramics class. And we were just about to begin our wood firing our ceramics when I abruptly had to return back to Sweden. And the rest of the semester, it continued online. And even though my professor, he did a really good job of adapting to the online circumstances, I think that having the class virtually really challenged the creative process. It was very tough to get inspired working by yourself and not having that kind of spontaneous input. I believe that a big part of creating art is about being in a community with other artists. And I think that virtual interactions inhibit that kind of innovation. So a physical social environment sparks creativity from the spontaneous interactions that are only possible when we interact around other people. So therefore, my question for you all is, as we meet the new normal, how will Charlotte work to support the creative environment for artists and art students? And how do you think the absence of a physical community will affect artists' creativity? Thank you.
All right. So speaking of things to look forward to, right? Who wants to dive in and tackle this idea of, being virtual is tough to get inspired. It's tough to be spontaneous, and being physically together is a big part of being creative.
I can go. It's twofold, because I think part of it, I've heard from a lot of people that, like what Keith was talking about earlier, that the virtual options just completely widened the scope of anybody who could participate and witness and be a part of these arts performances and opportunities and workshops in a way that just simply wasn't possible before. I offer classes and people who, I was teaching people in New York City and in England and all over. So it was just really interesting to kind of see that. And also I realized that some people maybe thrived better in that situation. Some people who would have never normally taken my classes, because I had pre-recorded some of them, just like ate that opportunity up because they could do it on their time at 2 a.m. The pendulum swing on the other side of that is that I can't imagine how hard it would be to try to do a ceramics class online with people in another country. That doesn't, it's just like, it's so against the tactile nature of that medium. And also as artists, one of the things that I quickly realized, because my studio space was shut down almost immediately, is how much just the communal process of talking and showing ideas around and seeing other people's work and kind of watching other people make their marks and toss things around was part of my work. Like, it was work. I used to think maybe I was slacking off, or I was maybe distracting myself, but when I kind of took that stimuli away and it was just me sitting on the floor of my apartment, I felt just dried up and it was hard to kind of find that source again. And so I think it's kind of this both and as we continue to approach this, like, how do we make things more accessible? And then how do we like truly emphasize the opportunity that we get when we get them to have people in person and, meeting and touching and really alchemizing that energy, which is what art is. It's taking energy and thoughts and ideas and creating something with it, right? Creating an emotion or creating a piece or create a moment or like a communal thought. And so it's like, how can we more intentionally do that and broaden the scope a little bit? So it's a little bit of how can we both widen and deepen the experience?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Man, I was going to say, Bree's mention of being intentional with this, I think, is really important. The online content has improved so much, and I've had people say, wow, is live performing arts going to have trouble competing with Netflix? Now you can get this rich variety of things, and you can, but it's that communal piece that you can't get on Netflix. And that's why it's incumbent on people in my profession, those of us that are facilitators here, to make sure that we really do a good job of everything that surrounds the actual performance itself. Because just the performance alone could be on Netflix, but what we have is setting the table for that great communal meal that we can have together, the exchanges, the energy that creates. And so, I'm hopeful for those of us that are in this business that we will give renewed focus on everything that surrounds the whole experience.
And Matt, real quick, I just want to hitchhike off what Tom is saying. As a patron, I don't ever think the physical community can go away. While I enjoy the online and the virtual, as Tom mentioned, I missed being in the crowd. I missed watching the curtain actually go down. I think what we have is an opportunity, again, back to the virtual, having folk have a warm engagement to the arts. And if they enjoy it enough, and like we're saying, that the technology is getting better, the offering is better, it pushes them out to the physical space. So there isn't a one or the other. I think there is both that will coexist and will actually help the ecosystem a lot better.
Well, as a lifelong theater rat, I couldn't agree more that there's nothing that can replicate the exchange of energy between an audience and an artist, whether that's in the performing arts or in other disciplines as well. So I couldn't agree more. Evan, let's run the next submitted video question, please.
Hi, my name is Kennedy Riddick, and I'm a graphic design major in the class of 2023 here at Queens. I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm ecstatic to be in Charlotte for school. So for my question, each city, of course, has their own culture reflected in its art. Public art from my home city is different from public art in Charlotte and vice versa. Baltimore is a historical city with much of its art and architecture reflecting that. So buildings from the 1800s and earlier stand next to contemporary art and buildings less than a decade old. contrasting that with Charlotte, which comparatively feels like it's grown overnight. With Charlotte being a city skyrocketing in popularity and limitless in its potential, now is a great time to solidify its identity, especially through public art, which has a litany of purposes depending on the piece. My curiosity lies in what responsibilities public art has to its community and what communities are in need of its service. Public art often acts as a visual manifestation of a community's identity, thoughts, and emotions, often translated into a physical space. What communities within Charlotte do you believe are missing this platform to express those things and their identities, and why? Also, what emotions and ideas would most benefit from public art in these communities? Lastly, what responsibilities does public art have to the community it serves?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there, but let's dive in. You know, this idea of the role of public art in forging our city's identity, plus those other important, points that she had as well. Does anyone want to dive in and share their thoughts on this?
I would like to. I'm just afraid I'm going to get caught off.
You know what? We're cheering you on, Yadisel. We're cheering you on.
Yes. I believe that there's so many communities within Charlotte that don't have a voice, that don't have a platform, that aren't in this art world that we do have uptown, that we have in Plaza Midwood and NODA. I think that, as I was saying before, we're missing out on these voices, these new voices, this new creativity, this infusion of cultures that we have within the city that we are not allowing to create, and the importance of having a physical place for people to gather and to nourish from each other is critical. And I think that, and going back to the last question about how that's going to affect our creativity. But in terms of having a platform, public art is not equally distributed within the city, and that is something that is dear to my heart, because at this time I'm working on the project for murals around the city. And I think that it's our responsibility to bring art to these communities, but not only bring art to these communities, have art in Uptown, in NODA, in Plaza Midwood, in these other spaces, so that these communities feel welcome to come see this art here as well. The bridge doesn't happen one way, it happens both ways. And I think that's what we need to do with public art, create spaces that welcome each community and that represents them in a way that they want to be represented, not in a way that people view them as, which is what I was trying to say when I got caught off last time, is that we tend to hold on to our ideas of who people are, and we really we don't fund and don't give opportunities or platforms for people to create something new, to bring something that is part of this new identity that they might have created with the cultures that they have in these communities.
Beautiful. Thank you, Yadisel. Absolutely. Bree, were you given a Snapchat?
Yeah, so good. I love Yadisel, and I love her work, and I love her language. So language is so powerful, and it makes me think about, like, kind of the end of this question is a funky one. Like, what responsibility does the public art have? Like, I don't think. And sometimes this is where we get tricky, because people have very different opinions about public art and the role of these public-facing events and other things. I don't know if necessarily the art itself has the responsibility, and sometimes even the artist. But I think people like to look at public art as the answer to things, and they want to kind of give feedback on the answer, that this is a full sentence with a period on the end. And I like to think that public art is a question, right? It's a question, like, what is this eliciting in you? Is it any kind of emotion? Any emotion is valid, anger, pride, nostalgia, that's okay. Like, it's okay to have it as this battering board for the community to connect in the way that Yadisel was talking about. And that's something that's really important, because as we talk about neighborhoods and communities that are completely overlooked, it's not just that we're not funding those opportunities in those spaces. We're not asking those questions with the public art because we're not caring to hear those answers. We're not saying what matters to you, who are you, what are your stories, what are your hopes and dreams, what's interesting to these people in these spaces. spaces. And that's something that all public art can continue to do, is just pop up these questions and then provide the space around to listen, because work is not just the piece on the wall. There's this moment that happens between the audience and the piece, and then, you know, kind of this ripple effect that happens. So the conversation that surrounds public art is as much a medium of the work as like the steel it was made of or the paint it was painted with. And so as we begin to shift our ideas away from that as meeting spaces and as questions that can elicit responses, and as us being willing to sit and listen and like be with those questions, then I'm excited to see what happens.
And,
Beautiful.
and Matt, I think, you know, oddly enough, you know, the answer to that question, what communities do we believe are missing? We already know what communities are missing. The Arts and Science Council put out a report. I'm quite sure every institution does some form of demographic report, recognizing who their patrons are, who their audience is. So we do know who we're missing. It's what are we going to do about that? And I think, you know, even my time spent on the Beckler board, when we looked at our metrics and we saw that there were some gaps, and that's why we started the Jail Arts Initiative. We recognized there was a community in our city that wasn't utilizing or underserved with the arts. And we said, how do we make something happen? So again, we know who's not being served. It's really about what are we going to do about it?
Wonderful. Evan, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next video question. So let's run that now.
Hi, my name is Ariana Shiraz, and I'm a senior at Queens, majoring in art history and minoring in chemistry. I am from Charlotte and have lived here my whole life. As I've lived in Charlotte, I've witnessed the city grow and evolve. With a growing population and increasing infrastructure, Charlotte's identity is progressing as well. As Charlotte's identity evolves, how can we make museums and galleries become a central part of Charlotte? And how can museums and galleries collaborate with the public and collectors of Charlotte? Thank you.
So another, oh, we lost Irisol again. Oh my gosh. Okay, no problem. We shall be back soon. I know it. Another identity question. This has always been part of the sort of Charlotte conversation, right? What's our identity? And I think a lot of us have notions about, you know, what the identity is, which is maybe a melting pot of sorts. You know, people move here from all over. And that makes it part of the beauty of being a Charlottean, is that you can move here, get your uniform dirty, roll up your sleeves, and get involved. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question. Anyone on the panel, this idea of the role of museums and galleries in this identity piece and the role that they can play.
Matt, one thing I would add that I think applies to all of the facilities here is we are at a time, I think, of growing maturity in Charlotte where we're going to perhaps be able to pivot from what has been, with good reason, a focus on bricks and mortar and getting facilities built that didn't exist before, that Charlotte was without. Getting those built, that was a really wonderful investment and a necessary investment. But now I think there's going to be an increasing focus on what is it that we do with these places? How do we make them meaningful, impactful? And I will say to our donor friends who have been really great with helping us with the bricks and mortar, we need you to continue to be helpful, to create programs and activities and support the work that will make your investment in these facilities pay off. And I do think it is a time in Charlotte where we are transitioning from such a focus on bricks and mortar to saying, let's create really high quality, impactful programs.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to weigh in on this one before the next question? Evan, let's
real quick.
Oh, yeah, please, Keith, go ahead.
I was gonna say real quick, as a board member, for the Beckler, for the Mint, that's part of our job. That's part of our task to make sure we involve the community. It's not just the folk who work at the institutions, it's everyone who's involved with the institution. And so part of that is the engagement strategy, and it's intentional. We're making sure we have these warm entry portals for folk to come in, to not feel overwhelmed, to make them not feel like they don't know what they're looking at or feel stupid. That's our job, to make sure that we collaborate intentionally with our community. And again, asking the right questions, which will fuel them to want to come in, to want to come back, to want to spend money. And so that part of that engagement strategy it involves all of us, everyone that, again, who's involved with the institution, from the executive staff on down to the board, to the frontline staff. When people walk into the doors, who's at the front desk, who is actually saying hello. I mean, it is everyone creating a culture in which people feel welcome to come.
Absolutely welcome and invited, and like they belong there. So key to be intentional about that moving forward. Evan, let's run the next video, please.
Hi, I'm Astrid Bridgewood, an art history major here at Queens and proud to be class of 2024. I'm a Charlotte local, I've grown up here, and I wanted to stay and watch Charlotte grow as I pursued my first degree. I've always been fascinated by public art in Charlotte, whether that be the variety of sculptures in parks and college campuses throughout the city, or present in murals on walls or streets. I feel that public art is vital to the culture of Charlotte, and personally have loved to see pieces like Furrow, a sculpture by Thomas Sayre, visible from the light rail line south of uptown Charlotte, and the iconic mirrored Firebird, a statue installed in 2009 in front of the Beckler Museum of Modern Art. I have loved to see a kind of active engagement develop around Charlotte's public works, like the prominent Black Lives Matter street design painted on North Tryon in June of 2020. When looking into this mural, I pulled a quote from the Charlotte Observer regarding Tryon Street's reopening to traffic and the mural's subsequent removal. Community organizer and activist Cass Otley is quoted as saying, "The Black Lives Matter mural has become more than just paint on a street. It's a statement of promise for the city to do better. It echoes that Black and brown lives matter and they're of value in the city." I am very intrigued by the future of public art as Charlotte continues to grow past and through the complications of COVID-19, specifically related to this integration of activism into public space. I hope to see a continuation of these themes, intersectional public art, widely accessible and promoting the voices of these communities through that art. I am curious as to how these themes will continue to be integrated into public art, and your perspective on the future of public art in Charlotte following both the upheaval of COVID-19 and the ideas introduced by the notable Black Lives Matter movement over the summer. Do you feel that activism and ideas like the Black Lives Matter movement will continue to be integrated into the art and culture of Charlotte? Lastly, what are your thoughts on permanent public works that speak to these issues? Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I mean, we all know what a almost sacred space that block on Tryon Street became in the wake of the Black Lives Matter mural happening in early June. So I'd love to hear whoever wants. And we have a couple of muralists on our panel, but I'd love to hear from anyone about this idea of activism in the public art space.
Yeah, I can start. And I think, to continue on what I said earlier, thinking about the questions that these pieces present, right? Rather than just these full stop statements. Like, I was involved with helping with the production of the mural on that day in June, and it was just like a completely electrifying day. Like, for me, it was one of the first days that I had been around my friends and been around people, and people were coming up and dropping off like Gatorade and pizza, and things were like lively and exciting. And I don't know, it was just tangible, this energy that was kind of happening. And I still refuse to drive through there because I feel like it's sacred. And so even though if you look at it, it looks horrible, right? I think it looks terrible the way it's peeled up. And so, the questions then become, what does it say about Charlotte that we're willing to make this statement and then let it be driven over? What does it say about, the city and the entities that fund these kind of things, but then want to, where's the follow-up? Where's the permanence? Or how can we, what's the importance of it being activated on this main street during a time of, civil unrest and a lot of protests? Thinking about the richness of those questions will help us to kind of guide those forward. And yeah, I don't think public art's going to go anywhere anytime soon. I think murals are on the up and up. They're becoming a really big part of Charlotte's identity. And I think as we tap more artists into the conversation, these things are naturally going to come up and come through and present themselves. It's not really the other way. It's not like, here's the thing, respond to it because you belong in this marginalized group. It's rather just putting people on and giving people opportunities to let those things be produced in a way that makes more sense. So yeah, it's not going anywhere. Expect more of it. And I'm excited to see kind of what comes and what are the answers to these questions that this first round of murals and public art has presented.
And
Absolutely.
I'll speak on that.
Yeah.
I believe that, well, I'm interested to see where it's going to go from here in terms of what gets funding for artists to actually speak about, because I feel that the more controversial the subject, the less likely that it is to get funded, or as artists have always done, we find funding of our own to put out whatever it is that we feel needs to be said. So I hope that the people who have the funding will have this open-mindedness of asking those questions, of allowing the charlatans to consider things beyond what we know, and to have these discussions, because that's the whole point of art, to be able to present something to you in a way that will make you not only consider a different perspective, but also change you in a way that might not be huge, but will stay with you, and you will come out after seeing this different than when you went in. So I'm interested to see where we go from here. And like Bree said, what does it say about us that it did get funded, it did get the attention, and now it can be destroyed? So moving forward, I'm just as thrilled as you to see.
Yeah. And I think, when it comes to art, art is activism. I mean, it always has been. And I think for true activists, we mentioned Cass, they're making sure that it's just not performative, that we're doing it, and then all of this just goes away. Like Bree said, you go down Tryon and the mural is fading away. Black Lives Mattered in 2020. Will they matter in 2021, 2022, and not just making, these performative gestures that don't move the needle? And I think our artists play a key role in that. They're the ones that are sparking that conversation. And so it's not going to go away. And some more of that stuff needs to be more permanent. Those pieces of work need to be there for people who come in after. People are moving to Charlotte every day. So if they didn't move here in June, July, or August, then they missed the mural. And now they're here and they're not a part of that conversation and just, pictures on a wall or pictures on a T-shirt. And I think that's where we have to move past. Those things have to become permanent. They have to be part of the lexicon, part of the dialogue, part of our fabric in order for us to move forward.
Yeah, I will say that Black Lives Matter mural project was also this interesting moment where you got to see what's possible when the passion and the will is actually there. I mean, Charlotte's Creative Mind nonprofit was part of sort of instigating that project and pulling the teams and organizations together to pull it off. And from the original idea to paint hitting the street, it was 72 hours. I mean, and to think about the things that had to happen in order to get to that moment where with city lawyers and designs being submitted and approved, and then CDOT and CMPD that all have to play their role in creating a safe environment for the artists to create. And then not really knowing what's going to happen after that day, but the fact that could even happen in 72 hours, where in any other moment it may have taken 3 months or 6 months or a year to pull something like that off, shows me that when there's passion and will there, that, what's truly possible. And so I look at that as a moment of inspiration to say, wow, a lot is possible. A lot more than we thought was possible is possible when the will and passion is there. I think we have one more submitted video question, this one perhaps from an alum, I think. So Evan, if we could play that one real quick.
Hi, my name is Kat Martin. I am a Queens alumna from 2010, where I graduated with a BA in English Drama, so I'm really happy to be here. I am currently getting my MFA in Social and Environmental Arts Practice from Prescott College, and I am working on a new project called Fix a Plate in Charlotte, North Carolina, that explores the relationship between the wedge and crescent, food justice, oral history, and how all of that shows up on our plate. My question for the panel is this: can you explain the role of listening in your practice with communities and the different ways that you measure efficacy following your projects? Thank you.
Ah, yes, the importance of listening. And who wants to tackle that question?
I can. And it makes me think about something that I wanted to speak on earlier that Keith and Edisol both alluded to, is this idea of who will be funding what, and thinking it through the lens, this term keeps coming up around the hot talk that's going on of return on investment. And so I think that we can kind of address and think about our metrics of success a lot different, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be a monetary return on investment for things to be successful. And when we talk about like just communities being activated, how does that look? And if it's virtual, how does that look? Are we making sure that it's accessible? What is that like? And so, yeah, listening is a completely central part of the process. It's the beginning, middle, and end, which can slow the process down. But I like to think that all arts processes that are slow are healthy processes, and we owe it to ourselves as a community to embrace and uphold healthy processes.
Absolutely. I think some of these words like ROI and economic development, while very important, can also be trigger terms for a lot of people in the creative community. I think it might be important for us to develop sort of an expanded vocabulary around this topic, so that these sort of concepts and the metrics that they're looking to measure things with, how do we apply those to smaller cultural organizations and individual creatives? Clearly, our sector needs limitless room for expression to be unbound by commodification or censorship. And so all of these are going to have to be taken into account as we consider what does ROI mean in the creative sector here.
Matt, I would add to this, I think what's fundamental with a lot of these things are the ways that we authentically show respect to people. And listening is part of showing respect, that and not just listening, in a passive way that doesn't have, some outcomes to it, but listening and then shaping our next steps based on what we've heard. And that goes back as well, to changing the paradigm in our cultural management to have less top down and more bottom up. And frankly, people like me and others that are in leadership roles to be better listeners and to authentically take what we're hearing and adapt our views and encourage those viewpoints to really emerge and have substance.
Beautiful. Well, no doubt. So yes, Irisol, you have something you want to say here?
Just a quick thing. Yes. I'm sorry. I believe that a measure of efficacy for whenever you feel that whether you're engaging the community or not is gaining their trust, is knowing that they know that your commitment to them is beyond your ego, it's beyond your work, it's beyond your portfolio. It is a true statement to what they need and to enhancing whatever it is that you're a part of. And I believe that knowing that you have trust and that people look up to what you're working towards can give you that sense of, okay, I am listening, and they feel heard.
Thank you, Irisol. Absolutely. I think we have 3 questions left, and so I know we're short on time, but we're going to try to tackle these very quickly. I think what we'll do is just have one panelist each answer these questions in the interest of time. So the first one is from Oscar Grooms. Oscar's an engineer, a physicist, a jazz critic. He's also a Queen's University board trustee. And his question is, as the pandemic has wreaked havoc on all of us in some shape or form, those with less have seemingly felt a greater disproportionate blow. What effect has the pandemic had, from your perspective, in crossing cultural and economic barriers with the arts, and how are you addressing that? So would anyone here like to take that question on? I know we're hitting our panelists like sideswiping into brand new questions. Surprise, ninja question.
Matt, I'll plunge in because I think it's a really good point and something that we're going to have to continue to respond to. You know, in the immediate, you know, I mentioned one of the things we did working with Center City Partners was to create a gig fund and start doing concerts all over the place. We need more of that. You know, I think part of the point that's being made here is the most vulnerable in our communities have been the most hurt by this. There have been some people who actually financially are okay right now. A lot of people that have gone through COVID okay, but the most vulnerable among us have been the most hurt through this. And so in the arts, that is profound when you look at people that make their living through gig money, playing at restaurants, bars, various places. You know, their income was entirely taken away. And so we need to be assertive to help reestablish, because they are in that class of people that are the most vulnerable in our city and most impacted.
Thank you, Tom, for that. The second to last question, the penultimate question, is from Kathy Collins, who's a poet and co-founder of Charlotte Center for Literary Arts. And she says that while the pandemic has made bringing outside artists to Charlotte nearly impossible, it's actually expanded virtual opportunities for cultural engagement and increased competition for local organizations like Charlotte Lit. So through online platforms, writers and instructors and students are able to participate in readings and classes all around the world. Ironically, we are having a harder time making a local impact, she says. So how can both established and emerging Charlotte area artists and arts organizations distinguish themselves within the even larger virtual field and able to create these sustainable careers that benefit the community? Anyone want to tackle that one in maybe 60 seconds? Getting lost in the virtual field, the expanding virtual field.
Matt, it is hard, and you know, I think you know, as we reemerge from this, you know, we are really focused on what can we do that creates a hybrid model that gets, you know, live audiences together with virtual audiences, and that I think may actually have some real promise, where we find hybrid models that actually try to do both.
I think hybrid experiences and hybrid models are going to be an absolute key part of the future. Final question of the evening is from your friend and mine, Dr. Jen Edwards, Chief Curator and Curator of Contemporary Art at the Mint Museum. And she says, since 2018, the Mint Museum is committed to doing installations with at least 4 local artists. And that comes with, you know, not only audience exposure, but also with compensation, like money and space and time. In this past year, due to COVID, they were able to increase that number to 34 artists who will have exhibitions and be a part of group shows in both of the Mint locations. What she's been thinking about lately is how do we move that exposure beyond just Charlotte, just local audiences and tourism, and help bring a national exposure to those artists in some sort of national, international recognition. So I think she's asking, so what is the marketing and sort of press approach that we can take to push these local creatives into more of a national spotlight? You know, and is that something we do individually, or do we come together as a group and sort of do this in a collaborative sort of a way? Any final thoughts on that, on Dr. Edwards' thought there?
I think it's a group effort. It's a community-wide effort. You know, we all have to pitch in to make sure we're focusing. I mean, just the video that, you know, Tom showed earlier, I mean, that video was amazing. So if you think about videos like that can go out, you know, to communities across this country and show people what Charlotte is doing, what Charlotte is about, what our artist community is about. I think we all have a hand in that. Our institutions have to do more localized, you know, works and exhibits that showcase that work. We all just have to continue to pitch in and look at the community as a whole and think about how do we push forward. And again, artists have to do their part too. They have to do the online work. They have to show their work. They have to be able to want to sell their work. You know, I think there's a lot of, it's layered, but again, it's a all hands on approach.
Well, with a topic like this, there's no doubt we could have a month-long symposium, right? But it is a school night, And so this, we're going to end the questions there. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart, Bree, Idasol, Keith, and Tom. Thank you for your time and your insights tonight. Thank you for your extraordinary work and leadership that each of you are bringing to our community. And it's an honor to call each of you a colleague and a partner in this journey into the future here. So I, for one, am excited to see what comes next. And with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Dr. Siu Challens-Lipton to close us out. Siu?
Thank you, Matt, for moderating this evening's discussion. It's evidence there are many thoughts on the horizon for our artistic community and for our city at large. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating in this discussion and for sharing their outlook. Keith, Tom, Irisol, and Bree, we are grateful for your engagement tonight and for your creative work with this city that we call home. This year, we have learned the power of the arts to unite us and make us part of something greater than ourselves. From the balconies of Milan to the streets of Charlotte, painter Juan Miro's quote is all the more relevant. A simple line painted with the brush can lead to freedom and happiness. On behalf of the Learning Society and the Arts at Queen's, thank you to all of you who join us from your home. We are hard at work crafting restorative and thoughtful programs for 21-22. We hope to share a smile in person with you someday soon.